Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran with episode 109 of season 3. In the last episode, we looked at Tipu Sultan in peacetime, the administrator, the reformer, the man shaped by his father's brutal discipline. We saw a ruler dismantling many of the legacies of old Mysore and building something new, more akin to what Chikkadeva Raja had built, a centralized state with a modern bureaucracy, a rationalized revenue system, and an ambition that went beyond mere military survival. But from that orderly and logical mind that had ordered the world of administrative reforms, what went wrong? Why did it descend to the chaos and cruelty of Tipu's actions in Malabar? This episode goes to that question that haunts Tipu Sultan's legacy forever. But before I do, as always, word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group, for their corporate support. That's what makes this podcast possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. The Malabar coast had been a problem for Mysore before Tipu Sultan inherited the kingdom. Hyder Ali had first moved into the region in the 1760s, drawn by its strategic value. The ports of Bangalore and Calicut gave Mysore access to the sea, to trade, and critically, to the possibility of receiving French military support arriving by ship. Without the coast, Mysore was only a landlocked plateau kingdom hemmed in on every side. With it, Mysore was dangerous, a state with maritime reach and the capacity to communicate with Europe over the heads of the British. This is why the British would eventually make severing Mysore from the sea one of the primary strategic objectives of the Anglo-Mysore Wars. But in the 60s and 70s, and I mean 1760s and 1770s, the coast was Hyder's to consolidate. But properly consolidating it meant subduing one of the last defiant holdouts, and these were the Nayars of Malabar. The Nayars were the dominant martial caste of the Malabar region, a community that had a complex social structure, a tradition of armed service to local chieftains, and an absolute attachment to their ancestral land, their temples, and their kith and kin networks. They were never a single unified, organized bloc, but a consolidation of local powers, each loyal to a Palegar or a petty Raja, each deeply suspicious of outside authority, and each capable of sustained guerrilla resistance. Hyder had conquered their territory. Hyder had not conquered the Nayars. So from the moment that Mysore absorbed Malabar, the Nayars resisted. They resisted Hyder, they would resist Tipu in the future. They retreated into the hills, re-emerged to attack supply lines. They sheltered British agents and repeatedly rose in open revolt the moment Mysore's military attention had shifted anywhere else. For both father and son, the Nayar doggedness went from military inconvenience to existential vulnerability. A Malabar and permanent rebellion could not generate revenue, it could not secure the ports, and certainly it couldn't prevent the British from using the Nayar discontent as a lever against Mysore at every single turn. Hyder's first major reprisal came in 1768. A British naval expedition had seized Bangalore, and the Nayars had taken the opportunity to rise. Hyder marched west in fury. He retook Bangalore. He levied devastating penalties on the feudal lords who had cooperated with the British, enforcing them at times with torture. And then there was the violence. That acquired a mind of its own. Mass executions followed. Prisoners were beheaded or hanged from trees. Their bodies left suspended along the roads and the crossroads, a deliberate permanent message embedded into the landscape that travelers could see. And even when execution was not used, Hyder resorted to the wholesale deportation of Nayar communities into the plains of Mysore. Thousands of people were uprooted from their homes, their temples, their land. Mortality during these forced marches was very high. This was not some sort of unintended consequence. It was an accepted cost. Tipu Sultan inherited this policy along with everything else. When he came to power in 1782, Malabar was still incompletely pacified. The Nayars had never fully submitted. They continued to resist and conspire, looking to both the British and to Travancore as potential protectors against Mysore. Tipu Sultan's approach was consistent with that of his fathers, systematic, calculated, no mercy. But what he added went beyond military suppression into something more deliberate and more disturbing. The pivot point was the suppression of the Nayar revolt of 1788. By then, Tipu had been governing Malabar for 6 years under the Treaty of Bangalore. 6 years had not produced compliance. In 1788, open revolt broke out again, and Tipu's response was comprehensive and merciless. All the prisoners taken in the conflict were to be beheaded or hanged. The Raja of Chirakkal, who had in fact surrendered voluntarily and had been received with some dignity, was subsequently accused of conspiracy, attacked, killed, and his body publicly suspended as a warning. This public display of a surrendered Raja's corpse was a calculated message that rank and submission offered no protection. Defiance of authority was no longer negotiable through hierarchy. It was enforced through visibility, enforced through humiliation. And it didn't stop there either. Some high-ranking offenders were tied to the legs of elephants and dragged across rough ground until their bodies just came apart. In Europe, this was known as being drawn and quartered. Execution by elephant was not merely punishment, it was theatre, combining spectacle, bodily annihilation, and the symbolism of sovereign power. The elephant itself was an extension of royal authority, if you think about it. These sorts of executions communicated not only punishment, but domination. One of Tipu's commanders in this campaign was a maternal relative and uncle named Muhammad Raza, who came to be called as the Benki Nawab, the Nawab of Fire. Benki in Kannada means fire. And he earned that name. On at least one occasion, Raza reportedly captured a group of rebels, locked them inside a house together with their wives and children, and burned them alive. And therefore, not surprisingly, his sobriquet, Benki Nawab. Tipu's forces were ordered to, and this is in the language in the accounts of the time, light up the fire of oppression. So villages were burnt, temples were dismantled, cultivated land was abandoned, irrigation works were destroyed, commanders were instructed to leave no functioning settlements intact, not only for the immediate military purpose, but to prevent any rebellion from regenerating once the Mysore army moved on. A community, stripped of its wells, its shrines, its storehouses, and its fields, cannot easily reconstitute itself. And that precisely was the objective. And now for a commercial break, and when I get back, more about the violence in Malabar, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
The violence in Malabar did not stop at execution and destruction. What came after the suppression of the 1788 revolt crossed into areas that historians, even those most sympathetic to Tipu Sultan, have found impossible to explain away or ignore. So following this revolt, Tipu ordered the forcible circumcision of captured men, forcibly converted to Islam, enforced not through persuasion, instruction, or any spiritual process, but through bodily harm. And then, to permanently remove the newly converted from their original caste identity, both men and women were compelled to eat beef. This was an act that, in a society structured around caste and ritual purity, functioned as permanent desecration. Those who converted were renamed, reorganized into separate military units called the Ahmadi or the Chela battalions. And they were neither fully integrated into Mysore's regular forces, nor permitted to return to their former identities, In July 1788, Tipu instructed his governor in Calicut, Sher Khan, to begin the mass conversion of Hindus to Islam. Around 200 Brahmins, for instance, were forcibly converted in one single campaign. Tipu's own letters survive to this. In a correspondence with the governor of Bekal, Badruz Zaman Khan, Tipu approved the circumcision of Nair captives, and he wrote, "You did right in causing 135 of them to be circumcised." A later letter, dated January 1790 to the same governor, contains the passage that has been cited most frequently in the legacy debate. It went, "I have achieved a great victory recently in Malabar, and over 4 lakh Hindus were converted to Islam. I am determined to march against that cursed Raman Nair very soon." Historians dispute that number, 4 lakhs. It's a figure of speech, very clearly an exaggeration, even a boast. But the letter is in Tipu's own handwriting, and therefore, whatever be the numbers, the intent is not ambiguous. Conversions produced dependence. They did not produce inclusion. The Ahmadi battalions occupied a middle ground between soldier and serf. They were useful to the state. They were attached to no community. They were unable to return to what they had once been. It was, with precision, an administrative process rather than a spiritual one. Now the big question, how does one grapple with all this? How do you assess it? The question is not simple and honest, but history does require grappling with genuine complexity. The first complication about many of these things is the source. Where did these accounts come from? And that is the real problem. Much of the most vivid testimony about the Malabar atrocities come from British records, accounts that were compiled by officers and administrators who had every interest in portraying Tipu Sultan as a religious fanatic and a tyrant. Some historians have argued that these early British accounts, particularly those of James Kirkpatrick and Mark Wilkes, were produced by men with powerful reasons to demonize Tipu, and that some of the most extensive claims cannot even be verified independently. Another author, Kate Brittlebank, whose work on Tipu's search for political legitimacy remains essential reading for anyone on the subject, notes that the temple grants and the Sringeri correspondence that Tipu entered into with the head of the Sringeri Mata suggests a far more complex reason with Hinduism rather than this British caricature will permit. But, and this is critical, the source caveat has its limits. The cumulative record is not solely British. Kirmani, another historian, this is Tipu's own court historian, confirms the broad pattern of these campaigns. The letters to Badru Saman Khan are Tipu's own words. French officers embedded with the Mysore army corroborate the violence, even if they contextualize it a little differently. The landscape itself, which British administrators found stripped and desolated when they arrived in 1799, is also its own kind of evidence. Even Irfan Habib, who should be counted as the most sympathetic of serious historians, most sympathetic to Tipu on this subject, has acknowledged that Tipu's forced conversions in Coorg and Malabar cannot be covered by any apologia. Now, all of the above was the first complication. The second complication is context. Tipu was not operating in some sort of a moral vacuum of his own creation. Malabar had been a near continuous revolt for 2 decades. The Nair people had repeatedly sheltered British agents, conspired with Travancore, and produced intelligence to Mysore's enemies. Clearly and avowedly, they were acting as an enemy of the Mysore state. Therefore, every revolt that happened in Malabar for the state of Mysore was a potential invasion corridor. The violence Tipu deployed was extreme, but it could be said, like much of history, that it was deployed against a security situation that was, from Mysore's perspective, genuinely existential. No historian has used this as a defense. Burning families alive inside their houses cannot be justified by some sort of strategic necessity. Forcible conversions and ritual humiliation cannot be excused by pointing to what the British were doing elsewhere. These acts were what they were. Understanding the context is not the same as excusing the act. And then there's that third complication, and that's the one that makes the story of Tipu remarkable. Tipu Sultan simultaneously ordered the sack of temples in Malabar and at the same time funded the restoration of one of the most sacred Hindu institutions in South India. Here's the story. In April 1791, during the Third Anglo-Mysore War, it was a war that Tipu himself had triggered by attacking Travancore. The Maratha cavalry under Raghunath Rao Patwardhan swept into Sringeri. This was a monastery established by Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century, and it remains today one of the holiest sites for the Hindu world. The Marathas pillaged it. They desecrated the idol of the goddess Sharda. They beat the Brahmins. They looted valuables, and that loot was estimated at 60 lakh rupees. On the 6th of July, 1791, Tipu Sultan wrote a letter directly to the Shankaracharya at the time, Sachidananda Bharati Swami. He condemned the attack. He ordered his Asaf to provide funds immediately for the reconsecration of the idol, and then he sent personal gifts. A sari with heavy gold zari for the goddess, shawls for the pontiffs. Between 1791 and 1798, Tipu Sultan wrote 29 letters to the Shankaracharya, every one of them according to the Sringeri Mata's own records, expressing devotion and concern. Sringeri Mata still holds those letters, and the silver palanquin that Tipu sent is still visible. So here's the complicated portrait. A man who ordered villages burned in Malabar was writing letters of personal devotion to the Shankaracharya of Sringeri. A man who sanctioned forcible circumcision, made endowments to approximately 156 Hindu temples, including the Ranganatha Swami temple at Srirangapatna. This contradiction has made Tipu one of the most politically contested figures in Karnataka's history. A few years ago, in 2015, Siddaramaya's government instituted something called Tipu Jayanti, an annual state celebration of Tipu's birthday on the 20th of November. When this happened, violence broke out in the Kodagu district and 2 people were killed. In 2019, the Chief Minister, then Yediyurappa of the BJP, cancelled the celebrations, citing the violence in Kodagu, a region that had never accepted the Mysore state narrative of Tipu as a modernizing hero, because Kodagu remembers what his forces had done there. Tipu's descendants have since demanded the reinstatement of the celebrations. This agreement has not been resolved because it cannot be resolved. It is not a historical argument, it is a political one, fought with historical ammunition. All said and done, what neither side of the argument adequately accommodates is a figure who defies both the nationalist hero narrative and the communal villain narrative. He was both the man who burned Malabar and the man who rebuilt Sringeri. He was the ruler who forced many conversions, 4 lakhs or otherwise, and the ruler who made endowments to 156 temples. History refuses the tidy verdict, and the honest response to Tipu Sultan is not a verdict at all. It is a reckoning, even if it is one made from the purest agnosticism. In the next episode, I arrive at the event that ended the peace entirely and triggered the Third Anglo-Mysore War, the Travancore trigger, and that is coming right up. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the history of Bangalore.